See her? Nobody want her, let's laugh at her.
The crystal chandeliers cast diamond-shaped shadows across the marble floor of the Belmont Grand Ballroom, where Seoul's elite mingled in their designer gowns and tailored suits. Sadiya stood near the refreshment table, her dark skin gleaming under the warm lights, wrapped in a burgundy dress that hugged her curves perfectly. She'd chosen it carefully, not to impress, but to armor herself against the inevitable whispers. "Still no dance partner?" Her half-sister Minji's voice dripped with manufactured concern as she glided over, champagne flute in hand. Behind her, 3 of her friends formed a wall of designer perfection, their eyes already scanning Sadiya with practiced cruelty. Sadiya's fingers tightened around her glass of sparkling water. "I'm perfectly fine, Minji." "Of course you are," Minji's smile sharpened. "It's just that everyone's been paired off and you're still here, alone." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "But then again, nobody wants you, do they? Not really." The words landed like acid on an open wound. Sadiya had heard variations of this her entire life, from the moment her Nigerian mother married Minji's father, bringing 7-year-old Sadiya into a world that had never been designed to accept her. The Korean high society that welcomed her stepfather's wealth kept Sadiya perpetually at arm's length, a curiosity at best, an unwelcome intrusion at worst. "I mean, look around," Minji continued, warming to her cruelty. "This is a serious event. These are serious people making serious connections, and you thought you belonged here." She laughed, and her friends joined in like a chorus of tinkling bells, each note designed to cut. Sadiya felt heat crawl up her neck, but she refused to look away. She'd learned long ago that showing pain only fed people like Minji. "I was invited." "By father, yes, out of obligation." Minji took a delicate sip of champagne. "But let's be honest, you're a charity case. A mistake he's too polite to correct. Nobody here actually wants." "That's enough." The voice cut through the ballroom chatter like a blade through silk, deep, measured, and carrying the kind of authority that made conversations die mid-sentence. Sadiya watched as the color drained from Minji's face, her champagne flute suddenly trembling in her hand. Sadiya turned. Jim Ming stood 3 feet away, and the world seemed to recalibrate around his presence. At 32, he was devastatingly handsome in the way dangerous things often are: sharp jawline, dark eyes that missed nothing, and a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it wasn't his looks that made people instinctively step back. It was the aura of controlled violence that clung to him like expensive cologne. Everyone in Seoul knew who Jim Ming was, even if they pretended not to. The legitimate face of the Ming Corporation, with his galleries and real estate ventures. The illegitimate truth that lurked beneath: gambling, protection, and a network of influence that stretched from Busan to Beijing. He was the kind of man politicians needed and feared in equal measure, the kind newspapers wrote about in careful euphemisms. He was also the last person Sadiya expected to notice her existence. "Mr. Ming," Minji breathed, her cruelty evaporating into fawning desperation. "I didn't see you there, we were just leaving." His eyes never left Sadiya's face. "You were just leaving." It wasn't a suggestion. Minji's friends scattered like startled birds, and after a moment of frozen indecision, Minji herself retreated, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor. The small crowd that had gathered to watch Sadiya's humiliation suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the orchestra tuning their instruments. Sadiya found herself unable to look away from Jim Ming's gaze, which studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "You shouldn't let people speak to you that way," he said finally. Sadiya's chin lifted. "And what would you suggest? That I make a scene? Fight back?" She allowed the smallest edge of bitterness into her voice. "People like me don't have that luxury, Mr. Ming." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "People like you. The ones who don't quite fit." She gestured vaguely at the room, at the sea of faces that had never seen her as anything but other. The ones who are tolerated but never truly wanted. Ah, he took a step closer, and Sadiya caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive with notes of cedar and smoke. And do you believe that you're not wanted? I believe in reality, Mr. Ming, and reality has been quite consistent on this point. The corner of his mouth quirked upward, not quite a smile, but something more dangerous. What if I told you that your sister is wrong? I'd ask what interest you could possibly have in my family drama. No interest in the drama, he said. Considerable interest in you. Sadiya's heart kicked against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain still, to not read too much into words that probably meant nothing. Men like Jim Ming didn't cross ballrooms for women like her. They certainly didn't rescue them from petty humiliations, and then. He extended his hand. Dance with me. It wasn't a request, not exactly, but there was a question in his eyes that made it something other than a command. Sadiya stared at his outstretched hand as if it might transform into something else, a trap, a test, a joke at her expense. Why? The word escaped before she could stop it. Because I want to, he said simply. Because you're the most interesting person in this room, and I've spent the last hour watching you pretend you don't notice everyone pretending not to stare at you. Because your sister is a small, cruel creature who needs to learn that her words have consequences. His eyes held hers, unflinching. And because nobody should stand alone at a ball when they're wearing a dress that spectacular. The orchestra began playing, a waltz, slow and elegant. Around them, couples moved onto the dance floor, but Sadiya barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the man before her, his hand still extended, waiting. She thought about all the reasons to refuse, the scandal it would cause, the attention it would bring, the questions that would follow. Then she thought about Minji's laughter, about every snide comment and backhanded compliment she'd endured in silence. Sadiya placed her hand in his. Jim Ming's fingers closed around hers, firm, warm, possessive, and led her onto the floor. The whispers started immediately. Sadiya could feel every eye in the ballroom tracking their movement as Jim Ming's hand settled at the small of her back, burning through the fabric of her dress like a brand. He guided her into the waltz with the kind of confident precision that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times, but his attention never wavered from her face. You're tense, he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You've just made me the center of attention in a room full of people who already dislike me. They don't dislike you, they fear you. Sadiya nearly stumbled. That's absurd. Is it? His hand tightened slightly at her waist, steadying her, keeping her close. You're everything they pretend not to be, honest, unimpressed by their performances, impossible to categorize or control. Fear often masquerades as disdain. She wanted to argue, but the intensity in his dark eyes made the words die in her throat. Instead, she let him guide her through the turns, hyper-aware of how perfectly they moved together, as if they'd been dancing for years instead of seconds. How long have you been watching me? She asked, the question coming out more vulnerable than she'd intended. 3 months. His answer was immediate, unapologetic. Since the charity gala at the Shilla Hotel, you were standing by the terrace doors and someone spilled wine on your dress. You didn't flinch, didn't make a scene. You simply excused yourself, and when you came back 20 minutes later, you'd somehow made the stain look intentional. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I was impressed. Sadiya's breath caught. She remembered that night Minji's friend accidentally bumping into her, the red wine spreading across white silk like blood. She'd wanted to cry, to leave, to never attend another one of these horrible events. Instead, she'd found safety pins and a silk scarf in the bathroom, had transformed disaster into design. She trailed off, unsure what to say. That's a long time to watch someone without speaking to them. I'm a patient man, Sadiya. The way he said her name, soft, deliberate, as if tasting each syllable, sent shivers down her spine. And I wanted to understand you before I approached. People reveal themselves in how they handle cruelty. You've been handling it with remarkable grace. You make me sound like a specimen under observation. No, His hand shifted higher on her back, pulling her incrementally closer. I make you sound like someone worth knowing. There's a difference. The waltz ended, but Jim Ming didn't release her. Instead, he kept his hand at her waist, his other hand still holding hers, as if daring anyone to question his claim. Sadiya could see Minji across the room, her face twisted with something that looked like fear. Good. Come with me, Jim said, and before Sadiya could respond, he was guiding her off the dance floor, through the crowd that parted for him like water, toward a private balcony overlooking the Seoul skyline. The cool night air hit her overheated skin as they stepped outside. Below them, the city glittered with a million lights, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the ballroom. Jim finally released her, but only to shrug off his suit jacket and drape it over her shoulders. I should go back inside, Sadiya said, even as she pulled his jacket tighter around herself, drowning in the scent of him. People will talk. People are already talking. Let them. He leaned against the balcony railing, studying her with that unnerving intensity. Tell me something, Sadiya. Why do you stay? Stay where? Here, in this world that treats you like an intruder, in a family that tolerates but doesn't love you. Why not leave? The question cut too close to thoughts she'd had 100 times, usually at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. Because running away would prove them right, that I don't belong, that I was never strong enough to claim my place. And what if claiming your place means destroying theirs? Something in his tone made Sadiya look at him sharply. What are you really asking me, Mr. Ming? Jim, he corrected, and I'm asking if you're tired of being the one who adapts, who endures, who makes herself smaller so others can feel bigger. He pushed off the railing, closing the distance between them in 2 measured steps. I'm asking if you want power instead of tolerance, respect instead of pity. And you're offering this out of what? The goodness of your heart. Sadiya tried to inject skepticism into her voice, but it came out breathless instead. I'm offering it because I want you. His honesty was brutal, unvarnished. I've wanted you since that night at the Shilla, and I'm not a man who denies himself what he wants, but I'm also not a man who takes without giving something in return. I'm not for sale, Mr. Ming. Jim, he said again, stepping closer still, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. And I'm not trying to buy you, Sadiya. I'm trying to free you. By what? Making me your mistress, your trophy. The word tasted bitter. His laugh was dark, humorless. My wife. The world tilted. Sadiya grabbed the railing for support, certain she'd misheard. What? Marry me. He said it as casually as someone might suggest dinner, but his eyes were anything but casual. They were molten, intense, filled with something that looked dangerously like hunger. Marry me, and I'll give you everything you've been denied. Respect, power, a place in this world that no one can ever question or take away. You're insane. But even as Sadiya said it, her mind was racing, cataloging possibilities. We don't even know each other. We know enough. I know you're brilliant. Your stepfather brags about your business degree from Oxford whenever he's had enough whiskey. I know you're resilient, creative, and far too good for the people who have spent years trying to break you. I know that you deserve more than their scraps of conditional acceptance. He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her jawline, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. And you know that I'm dangerous, powerful, and capable of giving you everything you've ever wanted if you're brave enough to take it. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why me? Because you're the only person in this entire city who looks at me and sees a man instead of a monster or a myth. Because when you stood alone in that ballroom, chin up despite your sister's cruelty, you reminded me of myself before I learned to bite back. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Sadiya's breath hitched. Because I'm tired of being alone, and I suspect you are too. Sadiya's mind screamed at her to refuse, to run, to recognize this for what it was. A calculated move by a man who dealt in power and manipulation. But her heart, her treacherous, lonely heart, whispered something different. What if he was right? What if she could have power instead of tolerance? What if she could walk into rooms and watch people like Minji shrink back instead of always being the one to endure? This is madness, she breathed. The best things usually are. Jim Ming smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed his face from dangerously handsome to absolutely devastating. Say yes, Sadiya. Say yes, and I promise you'll never stand alone in a ballroom again. Say yes, and watch what happens to people who laugh at you. The city lights blurred in her vision. Somewhere inside, the orchestra was playing another waltz. Somewhere inside, Minji was probably already spreading poison about this moment, about Sadiya's presumption in dancing with Jim Ming. Sadiya thought about all the years of careful tolerance, all the smiles she'd forced, all the times she'd made herself smaller, quieter, less. She met Jim Ming's dark eyes and saw her own hunger reflected back at her. Yes,